This is the first day of this January 2026 Rohatsu Sesshin. The first of 7 days of turning inward, cultivating a noble silence, which is to say, an inner silence. A mind that is at rest, even in the midst of thoughts. Thoughts and other passing phenomena. And it will develop all on its own. Without you having to try to steer it, control it. Just by continuously returning to your practice. And doing that through all conditions. And that includes feeling tired, achy, irritable, which are not unusual during the early days of Sesshin. Just keep returning. We're going to start off this sesshin with the teachings of the Korean Zen master Kusan Sunim, who lived from 1909 to 1983. He's a really important figure in Korean Zen, or Son, as it's called in Korean. And his influence went far beyond Korea to having a number of Western disciples. And his teachings are recorded in this book, The Way of Korean Zen. It's translated by Martine Batchelor and has an introduction by Stephen Batchelor, both who were among his disciples. So this is the text I'll be reading from. Before I get into it, I also want to mention that Kusan Sunim is included in the Center's soon-to-be-released new homage to Dharma ancestors chant. And it's a chant that goes beyond the traditional ancestral line that was passed down to us and based on the Soto school. That ancestral line is based on the idea of an unbroken chain of direct mind-to-mind transmission. And although this idea of continuity in an unbroken line is a beautiful image, it's not the reality. Our ancestors are far more diverse, and they don't fit neatly into an unbroken chain. And there are a number of scholars that have shown this, that it's just an image. The party line. In some cases, it was manufactured to the point where masters who didn't even know each other were connected. So this new forthcoming chant, which we decided to call Homage to Dharma Ancestors, includes masters in the Linji school, or Rinzai as it was known in Japan, Korean Zen, and women. It's not intended to be comprehensive or definitive, but it is we feel a truer representation of our ancestors. And Kusan Sunim is one of them. And I gotta say, up until quite recently, I didn't know much about him, along with many of the other ancestors included in this new chant, let alone the old, so-called old ancestral line. When I first started practicing some 25 or more years ago, Roshi strongly advised me not to read, not to make practice into an intellectual endeavor. And I followed that advice, and it certainly was excellent advice for me, because I was an academic, a PhD at the time, a professor. There's a real risk in studying Zen, including the words of ancestors. If we hold on to those words, cling to them, compare them, compare what they say to our practice, and in turn, that removes us from the intimacy that we need to have with our own practice, not somebody else's words, coming from a different time and place. And that applies to hearing sesshin, listening to teishos, encouragement talks, also zendo announcements, and words spoken in dokusan. We need to receive them and then let them go. Let them arise and disappear. Like a flock of birds flying across the sky. One moment they're here and then they're gone. And trust that you've gotten what you needed to from whatever was said. You don't need to hold on to it in the mind. The body will remember. I'm going to begin with some historical and biographical material, which is covered in the first chapter. That's the introduction by Stephen Batchelor. And I'm not going to read the entire essay verbatim, but I have pulled out some excerpts, enough to give an overview. And in addition to covering Kusan Sunim's life, it also covers the emergence of Buddhism in Korea, which was introduced over 1,500 years ago. And by the way, the word Sunim is an honorific title that means venerable monk or nun. So Batchelor starts off describing Korea as a resilient country that had survived through many invasions and conflicts, and including, of course, the split between North and South. And Buddhism was transported there to Korea directly from China and took on the qualities of that particular culture and life there, just as it had in Japan and also the United States and elsewhere around the world. He gets into a great deal about the various phases or stages of Buddhism in Korea, which I'm not going to get into. I'm going to jump to the biographical sketch of Master Kusan. He was born near a small country town located in the southwest of Korea. His parents owned a medium-sized farm, and family life was centered around work in the fields. Although his parents were Buddhist, he attended classes at the local Confucian school where he studied the Chinese classics until he was about 15. From an early age, Kusan had periodically been drawn to the monastic way of life. And reflecting back on his childhood years, this is what he said. When I was 9 years old, I remember thinking, could it be possible for someone to be without birth and death? Was it possible to have unlimited powers to move freely through the sky and on the earth? Such thoughts made me want to go and live with the monks in the mountains. But the fear of missing my parents prevented me from leaving home then. When I was 20, I also considered such a life, but I was not sufficiently determined. We can imagine that as a child, hearing about the teachings and the idea of going beyond birth and death would sound like something incredibly magical. And by the age of 9, it seems most kids do have a sense of death as a finality, having been exposed to it perhaps through the loss of a family member or community member, or through the death of animals and insects. But death of the physical body, the body that we are conditioned to identify with as fixed, separate, and unique. That's just one kind of death. Rishi Kapleau famously said that death is not a period, but a comma. Death is not a period, but a comma. Which is to say that life and death are not a fixed beginning and ending, but part of an ongoing process, a cycle. Like spokes on a turning wheel. There is death of the physical body. At some point, each one of us will experience that. But there's also the moment by moment death and rebirth that's happening. It happens beyond our ordinary perception. The wheel is turning. It's turning right now. It's never not turning. Kusan's biography continues. At the age of 26, he was stricken by a severe illness that caused him a great deal of pain. Upon seeing him in this condition, a friend who was also a devout Buddhist layman asked him. He asked, "Since the abode of the self-nature is originally pure, where does your illness lie?" And these words had a deep effect on him. Thereupon, he decided to go to a monastery where he recited the Kusan Sutra for 100 days. And when he completed this period of recitation, he found himself cured of his illness. And whatever this illness was, the text doesn't say. And then 3 years after that, he became convinced that he should dedicate his life to full-time practice of the teaching of the Buddha, to realize this aim. He left his home and family and started traveling to various monasteries in order to find a teacher. And after visiting 11 different temples, he finally met a master by the name of Hyobang Sunim and was immediately convinced that this master would be a good teacher for him. This biography then gets into some detail about Master Hyobang's history, but I'm going to skip over that to stay focused on Kusan. But Master Hyobang did agree to take him on as a monk and instructed him in the Hwado No. Hwado is the Korean word for koan. And no is one translation of mu. Another translation is not. And then there's the one that Roshi has brought up a number of times, in which he thinks is really the best translation of mo, which is, it's not what you think. It's not what you think. In the koan mu, for those of you who might be unfamiliar with the case, it starts with a monk asking Joshu, does a dog have Buddha nature? And Joshu replies, mu. It's not what you think. It's not yes, and it's not no. It's not this or that. And then there's, in the glossary of this book, it says, Hwado, or koan, literally means head of speech. Head here refers to the apex, or the point at which speech and thought are exhausted. The point at which speech and thought are exhausted. We're conditioned to want to come up with an answer or an explanation of some kind of our koan, or whatever practice we're working on. There's a big difference between thinking mu or thinking this or who. Even thinking about the breath. There's a big difference between that and being it, merging with it, And then continuing on with the story, it says that at the age of 31, Kusan became fully ordained. From the beginning, he was only interested in the practice of Zen and never attended a sutra school to study the Buddhist scriptures. He says, "I chose to enter the Zen sect because I thought that through meditation I would be able to free myself from birth and death and gain the power to transform this world into a Buddha realm. In the sutra schools, one is only told about cultivating the mind and awakening. I felt it would be better to actually realize these things instead." So we can already see how Kusan's teachings are very much aligned with the work we're doing here in Sesshin. And also at our center in general. We're not here to study or to memorize the teachings of the Buddha. Or to recite them perfectly. That's not why we're here. We're here to actualize them. To actualize for ourselves that which the Buddha experienced. It's not about thinking, but being. It's like the difference between trying to satisfy hunger by reading a menu or scrolling through food porn on Instagram and actually just eating. Directly. Eating the meal. And then Kusan continues, "When I started meditating, I was firmly convinced that I would be able to complete the practice within the 3 months of the first retreat period. I would be able to complete the practice within the 3 months of the first retreat period. I exerted myself to the point where I no longer cared whether I lived or died. But as the 3 months drew to an end, and I had still not realized my goal, I wanted to die. I felt it was no longer worth living. Once, while doing standing meditation, in order to prevent drowsiness, I thought of drowning myself or throwing myself off a high cliff. But at that very moment, a huge snow-capped mountain appeared before me. This made me recollect that the Buddha had practiced for 6 full years at the feet of such mountains. I then realized that it was somewhat presumptuous for me. You think so? It was somewhat presumptuous for me to want to complete my training in 3 months. Thereupon, I renounced my intention to die and redoubled my efforts. It's also presumptuous to set a timetable of 6 years. Or any timetable. A lot of us here have been through something similar to this, or are going through this right now. Establishing a timetable for our practice. Perhaps even for this very sesshin. Coming up with a battle plan for sleeping as little as possible. As if this practice is about clocking hours. Or about getting what you want. This is grasping for results. Clinging to the idea that there's got to be a payoff for my efforts. I myself struggled with this habit for years. And now, as a teacher, I see my students struggling with it. I feel that pain. But it is part of the process. At some point, sooner or later, we can't say when, at some point, you'll decide that the only thing left to do is to give up. To give up the strategizing altogether. Give it up and give in instead. Surrender to your practice. Surrender to the breath. To who? To this. Esto. To mu. In the paragraphs that follow, Kusan describes having some initial openings. Not true realization, he says, but gaining admittance to the door, as he put it. It was in 1946, when he was in his late 30s, while he was practicing at a hermitage, that he had the first of several more profound breakthroughs. He said that he lost any sense of the outside world, and he was no longer concerned whether he lived or died. He was so absorbed in his meditation that birds would come and sit on his head and shoulders and take pieces of stuffing that protruded from his padded coat for their nests. To say he lost all sense of the outside world is also to say he lost sense of an inside world. He came to see there was no outside and also no inside. Just this. This doesn't have any borders or edges to it. It's just. And the story continues. It says, a few years later, when the Korean War broke out, which was in 1950, there was a campaign led by communist insurgents from the north to round up people in the south, including monks, and hold them as prisoners. Kusan managed to avoid being captured and found safety in an area that was controlled by the United Nations forces. After the conflict subsided, eventually he received Dharma transmission from his teacher, Master Hyobang, and he inherited the role of abbot of the monastery, Sangwangsa. In the years after his teacher passed away, he expanded the monastery into a larger complex for Zen training, making it one of the largest in Korea. And it attracted many foreigners, just as some of the temples in Japan did. And it also says here that throughout the 1970s, Master Kusan worked tirelessly to develop the Zen training facilities at the monastery. He would preside over both the 3-month summer and winter retreats each year, giving formal Dharma lectures and individual instruction. In spite of his age and other responsibilities, he would always participate in any manual work in which the other monks were engaged. In addition, he was constantly being invited to give lectures, perform ceremonies, and attend meetings in temples throughout Korea. He also made visits to the United States and gave lectures at universities and Buddhist centers and established branch centers here in the US on both the East and West Coasts and also in Europe. And again, today he's regarded as one of the greatest Korean masters. As I mentioned earlier, he died in 1983. It was at the age of 74 when his health deteriorated. that time, it is said that he confined himself to his quarters, and on the evening of December 16th, 1983, he reportedly passed away while peacefully seated in meditation. And it said that 3 days before he died, he uttered his final words of Dharma. So a kind of death poem, which were common practices in both Korea and Japan, often composed in one's final moments or final hours or days. And here's what Kusan's final words were. Samsara and nirvana are originally not two. As the sun rises in the sky, it illuminates the 3,000 worlds. Samsara is the conditioned existence that we experience as suffering, having desires, cravings, aversions, and all of it stemming from an attachment to a fixed self, a fixed, separate self. So that's samsara. And as for nirvana, it's not some special happy place in a distant land. It's seeing through the delusion of self and other, seeing through it right here. Letting it all drop away. Kusan says these two states, samsara and nirvana, they're not two. They're two qualities of the same mind that we all share. And both are equally available to us. The thing is, we tend to dwell in one of them, samsara. But we have everything we need to go beyond. And that's our practice. The last line of the poem is, as the sun rises in the sky, it illuminates the 3,000 worlds. Now remember, the sun rises on its own, not because we make it rise. It does it all on its own. And as for 3,000 worlds, that sounds kind of like an arbitrary figure. Why not say 10,000? That's arbitrary as well. It's just a way of making concrete or bringing to life in words that which is beyond words, that which is immeasurable. this moment arises from mind. Can't put a number on it. Can't pin it down. Can't explain it. Describe it. The one thing that we can do is give our attention to it. Continuously. And that is enough. We'll stop here and recite the 4 vows.